let me welcome the audience. My name is Victor Kipiani. I'm the chairman for Geocase, Tbilisi think tank. We have a special privilege today, having a special guest and special speaker, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Federal Republic of Germany to Georgia, Mr. Peter Fischer. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to participate in this webinar. The webinar, which comes in the aftermath of the foreign minister's visit to Georgia. It was actually 2 days trip, as I recall. It was the first meeting by Minister Baerbock to Georgia, where she met with Georgian Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and the President of Georgia. Besides, she has visited the administrative boundary line. Just few words about the minister that during her ministerial stint for the last 16 months, she witnessed a number of critical changes in the German foreign policy. She has been very vocal on Russian aggression in Ukraine and been extremely supportive to the Ukrainian agenda, even during the pre-intervention period. Minister Baerbock was a member of Germany's ruling party, and she was elected to Bundestag. As I made some readings, she seems to be more aligned with pragmatic politics. Although when making a comment on the Germany's new national security strategy, the minister has explicitly said that her priorities would be focused and are focused on overriding significance of human rights. I should also mention, before giving the floor to His Excellency, that Minister Baerbock's visit to Tbilisi was preceded by her visit to North Macedonia, where she made a clear statement in support of Georgia's EU membership path. So this is a brief introduction. May I thank His Excellency again for his time. And Your Excellency, your summary of the minister's visit to Georgia, key highlights or key messages, and frankly, your personal impressions also will be extremely helpful for Georgian audiences. You have attended all those meetings. So please, we're all in attention, and thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kipiani. I'm delighted to join you and the audience. Indeed, it was the first visit of this German foreign minister, Ms. Annalena Baerbock, to Georgia. You mentioned that she's a member of the Green Party, one of the three parties in our governmental coalition. And you mentioned human rights, but of course, as a Green, also sustainability, climate change are at the top of her agenda. And she was actually thinking about coming a little bit later in the year, but we pushed the date forward. She pushed the date forward after all the events surrounding the so-called transparency law in Georgia, which created a lot of attention in Germany and other European countries. She spent about exactly 24 hours here, arrived Thursday night, and then had a full program all of Friday. Many in the audience may have followed her public statements, and her public statements are exactly the ones that she gave in all the meetings, namely that the visit comes at a critical time, a time of great opportunity, but also of risks and challenges. And in particular, our focus is on December 2023, when the European Council will decide on the candidate status of Georgia, whether Georgia shall be awarded the candidate status in December or not. And she made very clear that Germany's interest is that Georgia receives the candidate status now, and that then, as a candidate, Georgia negotiates with the European Union about membership and eventually becomes a member of the European Union. That's our German interest. She made just as clear that it's up to Georgia to meet the standard that's required to receive candidate status, and then later it will be up to Georgia to meet the standard that's required to join the EU. For candidate status, as I'm sure everyone in the audience knows, Georgia has been given the 12 priorities, and the minister made clear that there is time until December, but that we, the Germans, the European Union, want to see significant progress on the 12 priorities, because as much as for historical and geopolitical reasons, and we welcome Georgia to the EU, at the same time, we must ensure that our own standards of rule of law, freedom of media, human rights, in other words, the core values of a sustainable pluralistic democracy are met. And as all of you will know, we have some discussions inside the European Union with some of our member states about rule of law, independence of judiciary, media freedom, human rights, things like that. So there's a balance to be struck, and that decision is coming up in December. The minister met with some representatives of non-governmental organizations. She met at length with the Georgian foreign minister. There was a press conference with the foreign minister. She met with the president of Georgia. She went to see the administrative boundary line at Tbilisi. She was taken there by the European Union monitoring mission, which is an important tool of the European Union for peacekeeping and trust building. She met with students at Ilia State University, about 30, 40 students, for a good discussion of about 1 hour. She met with members of opposition parties, leaders of opposition parties, and finally she met with the prime minister, and the foreign minister attended that meeting as well. So you see a very full program, each meeting about an hour. Administrative boundary line took a little bit longer. And everywhere she delivered the message that I just outlined. And everywhere she also heard, yes, we want to achieve candidate status. Please give us the candidate status in December. Some argued we deserve it. We've made a lot of progress, not only towards meeting the 12 priorities, but overall, let's say, since our Georgian independence in 1991, look at the path that we've taken, the distance Georgia has traveled, and has become a modern democracy. And one of the minister's interlocutors said, it's our historical choice, it's our historical path towards Europe. And well, we talked with everyone at length what progress could still be made with regard to the 12 priorities. And we talked in particular about the law on de-oligarchization. There's some recommendations by the Venice Committee, which we think should be considered with great care and acted on. Then there's the law on justice reform, a very central area. And the minister recalled that Germany, after World War II and our Nazi past, we received help to build up an independent judiciary system. And for many years and with many countries, we've been working on providing advice, expertise, technical support on building up judiciary systems. And we're happy to support Georgia if there's any area where Georgians think that we could be helpful. And of course, there's the big subject of depolarization. Probably everyone's tired of hearing about depolarization, but what I say to all Georgian friends is that in December, this decision is coming. And this was the message of the minister too. It's a great opportunity. Every enlargement has been a blessing for the new member states. European Union is a blessing for its member states. As Germans, we can say that for sure. But if you look at the Eastern European countries that joined us, they've all benefited immensely from stability, economic development and prosperity, and peace. And that's what's on the table for Georgia. It's important not to miss that opportunity. And the depolarization also addresses, how shall I say, a little bit the type of domestic political discussion you have. And our advice is always, if you want a positive decision in December, please consider what news reaches European Union capitals about Georgia. Not too many people know in depth about Georgia. That's natural, just like here, not too many people know in depth about the European Union or individual member states. That's only normal. But the headline that reaches our capitals is, there is big disagreement in Georgia about, it seems like about everything. The parties are fighting. There is polarization. Accusations are flying back and forth. And the natural reaction in Europe could be, and that would be a big shame, if it were, what we hear from Georgia is trouble. And do we need more trouble in the European Union? Not really. We have enough trouble. We have not enough challenges and issues to deal with. So in the perspective of this December decision, depolarization would mean just bring down the temperature of the debate a little bit, so that the message that arrives in European capitals isn't Georgia is excited, Georgia is divided, Georgia is in strife, and Georgia could mean trouble. And the minister spoke very openly with all her interlocutors about that. She went back, confirmed in her view that it is in our interest that Georgia should get candidate status in December, join the EU at the right time, that we're ready to support that and promote that. However, the Georgians have to do it themselves. She said that the door is wide open, so Georgia has to walk through that door. I like to say, don't try to find a side entrance or a back door or to somehow sneak under the radar. That's not going to work, because there's a balance between our interest to extend the stability, the prosperity, the safeguarding of the peace that the European brings to this wider Black Sea and South Caucasus region, of course, in the face of the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the Russian behavior across this region. But we have to balance it also with safeguarding our own standards as a union of sustainable, pluralistic democracies. And she went back convinced that Georgia should move towards Europe, that we want to see some more progress, and we're ready to help to implement that progress.
Thank you so much, indeed. Your insight, in my personal view, been very helpful. helpful in many respects, because what you've just said, it contains and provides for several key messages, at least to me. And I think that there are various implications in a good sense of this word, which could be read between the lines. I fully agree with you when we speak about sort of depolarizing Georgian political landscape. That I personally wish that for the messages to be a bit more recalibrated, to put this in this way. Mm-hmm. And we should also remind, when it comes to certain order of bizarre messages, that European Union and the project for the European Union has been the most successful project for preserving the peace in the first place. So what is for the peace preservation cannot be an origin or source, for any trouble or threats for Georgia's security. I don't even wish, to spell out those certain strange connotations which we hear from time to time on Georgia's side. However, with recognition of that fallacy, which is sometimes typical for transition economies or transition democracies, Ambassador, let me also bring in some sort of reasonable degree of advocacy for Georgian cause. Mm-hmm. And that advocacy is focused precisely on a decision which we're expecting by fall this year. There have been much discussions even when we were expecting form a decision on the candidacy status, and we've got the European perspective. There were discussions at that time, and there's still discussions now, that if a future decision, if a forthcoming decision should go through the optics of, let's say, morality, and by saying morality, I really mean sort of, fulfilling strictly and unequivocally all those 12 recommendations, or that should be more biased. And I should admit it's not the right word, it's a word, the more political decision in terms of the worsened security environment in the region, in the context of the war in Ukraine, in the context of more pragmatic approach by European Union to get a better foot in the region. To what degree the European Union and the member states, and of course, I acknowledge you can't speak on behalf of the European Union and all the member states, but your personal take, how much we could, as you said, strike the balance between idealism and pragmatism in that respect, and whether our expectation that the right balance would be kept or should be in the place are reasonable expectations, and something we know which falls in line with your expectations as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. So let me just remark on preserving the peace. Yeah, Europe is a project of peace. That's what it was born, and it was born out of the rubble of World War II. So it came from a complete failure of peace on the European continent, and it brought together, let's take the example of Germany and France. We were considered arch enemies, hereditary enemies, prone to having war every decade, something like that. And we just said we have to flip the switch, because we saw where this excessive nationalism and fascism and so on led. So it is a project of peace. The accession to the EU is not about morality, but there's a balance. You're right. There's a balance between pragmatism, and that's, let's say, the geopolitical view. We don't want to leave a vacuum here for Russia to, how do you say, benefit from, or try to benefit from. We want to offer Ukraine, Moldavia, and Georgia a perspective to, well, to be members of the European Union. So to it's always who do you align with? Who's your partner? European Union membership is much more than alignment and partnership, but who's your group? Who are you with? And we don't want to, if it's not the European Union in this wider region, then who is it? There's kind of a sphere of influence that Russia can use in a malign way. So the balance is between this geopolitical view, which is a giant tailwind for the three countries that I mentioned, and it's not exactly morality. To join the EU, there's three basic conditions. One, you have to share the goals and values. Second, you have to be a sustainable, pluralistic democracy, and every word counts. Democracy is democracy. Sustainable means it's solid, it's not fragile, it's been tested, it's going to stay, it's mature. And pluralistic means that all parts of society take part in the democratic life. And sometimes in the Georgian discussion, it seems like a zero-sum game, but pluralism means to accept that my neighbor may have a different outlook on life, a different philosophy, a different idea of what's a happy and a good life. But as long as the neighbor respects the constitutions and the law of the countries, everything's fine. So, and sometimes the Georgian discussion seems like the tolerance level for pluralism is a little bit low. And again, I'm living here. I see that reality is much more differentiated, but the reporting that reaches Europe is, of course, is limited to a certain number of words and a certain number of TV time. And frankly speaking, the reporting around the transparency law was, the government seems to be a little bit pro-Russian. People are demonstrating in the streets. Let's see how it turns out. And that's unfortunate. And that's not helpful for a good decision on the candidate status.
Yes, I completely agree with you, especially when it comes to the reporting or to the communication policies. Well, obviously, I have my own comments on that, but just to spare more time for hearing on your views, I also completely second myself to what you said, that it should be a positive sum game, not just domestically but internationally. So the decision which we're waiting for, it's not just about Georgia's getting a candidate status, hopefully, but it's about, I would emphasize it again, through the optics of sort of, a mild balance between idealism and pragmatism, about EU having its own standing and robust standing in the region. So if I may reframe myself, if we just imagine it for a second, if we try unsuccessfully to get the candidate status, it would not be just the Georgia's failure, but it would be EU's failures as well. So I mean, we're on the same page in that respect. Winning by Georgia means also a win by European Union. At the same time, losing by Georgia meaning some failure. I would not say fiasco, but some failure by the EU policies in Georgia and in the region. But let me get to the second question, Your Excellency, in relation to the minister's visit. Are we able to say that that visit is a message or a signal of Germany's U-turn to Georgia and to the region, especially when it comes to the regional security? It's a quite popular and widely cited word in German politics, which actually penetrated into other languages. Correct me if I'm wrong in pronouncing Zeitenwende. Yeah. So should that visit, be a more sustainable message for a wider, broader, and more sustainable German engagement, Germany's engagements with Georgia and with the broader region? Should we read that in the broader context?
Let me just come back to the previous point very briefly, that if the candidate status didn't come, it would be a failure of European politics or the measures in the region. Yes, it is in our interest. So of course, in a way, you're right. But the EU is a union of states, and there are certain principles and rules for joining. So it's not a great argument to say, if you don't give us candidate status, it will be your loss. There may be some truth in it, but it won't be helpful to promote the candidate status, if you know what I mean. Now, Zeitenwende means the change of epoch, a new time, turning the page in the history book. And that refers to Germany's policy vis-a-vis Russia. Now, we were never naive about Russia, nor were we kind of unquestioned supporters of Russia. Please don't forget, half of our country was occupied by the Soviet Union and subjected to a dictatorship after the Second World War. So we knew about the Soviet Union, we knew about, let's say, Russia, but we disagreed with some principal elements of Russian policy. But we had a success with our policy of détente, because in the 1950s and 60s, we confronted, or we approached the Soviet Union, we called it the policy of strength. Anyone who recognizes East Germany can't have relations with us, you have to choose, and we will have a strong military presence, and the Russians will soon realize that they can never beat us militarily. And then by the end of the 60s, it became clear that the division is only growing deeper, tensions are growing higher, the arms race is getting faster. And the problems and the division in Germany is fortifying, and the people on both sides of the Iron Curtain have more problems in meeting and living, and families are, the separation is deeper. So then we decided, let's try to find, while disagreeing on some fundamentals, let's try to find areas where we can cooperate step by step, practice cooperation, build trust, and build a relationship. And we call that change through proximity. By cooperating, also, we will open the Soviet space and the societies, and democratic development may become possible. There will be more freedoms for the people and more opportunities for the people on both sides of the Iron Curtain. That actually worked, and in the end, German unity came along with the agreement of the then Soviet Union. And one example is always our energy partnership. We got between 30 and 40% of our oil and gas from Russia, and some countries warned us, you're excessively dependent, you shouldn't do that. They will use it as a political weapon against you. And our mistake was always to say, look, the Russians are reasonable, it's not excessive, it's a mutual dependency, and the Russian won't be so crazy. If they use it as a political weapon, they will do more harm to themselves than to us. We're their best customer. How can they just switch it off? What we didn't understand is that in Putin's thinking, his reason is, our reason is here, and his reason is next to it, and the intersection can be zero. And that's what happened. For whatever his reasoning is it national greatness? Is it a feeling of defense? Is it feeling of protecting Russian people. Who knows what it is? We can't understand it with our reason. He decided to launch this war against Ukraine and to throw away everything that Germany and the rest of the West had on offer, including being the best customer for Russian gas in the case of Germany. And Zeitenwende means we now have understood that Putin's reason does not intersect with ours, not necessarily, and that he's prepared to break all the rules of international law and to break the peace order in Europe after World War II. So fundamental things in order to pursue his interests. And so Zeitenwende is regarding our relationship to Russia, I would say, perhaps a little bit more than Georgia, but Zeitenwende is the tailwind that's behind the European aspiration and possibilities of Ukraine, Moldavia, and Georgia. But on the other hand, since 1991, 1992, Germany has been a strong supporter of Georgia's independence, territorial integrity, sovereignty, economic development. We've been your partner for more than 30 years. So being a good partner to Georgia is not something new.
Exactly. I fully agree with you. We all remember the tight historical bonds between Georgia and Germany at the beginning of the last century. So, I mean, of those fresh in our sort of, historical memories, and that's something which we very much appreciate. Thank you for explaining on Zeitenwende. Actually, yeah, what I had in mind is sort of a broad application of Zeitenwende. Let's say Zeitenwende version number 2, when it comes not just to Russia but to the overall region, which has been suffering for being in this geopolitical vacuum or geopolitical flux, for several decades after the end of the Cold War. So, as I've said, the visit which we're discussing hopefully could be a message or a move into the right direction for more sort of, rescheduling or reshuffling, that approach, deeper and a more sustainable basis. So anyway, that's been very helpful, Your Excellency. And the way when speaking about the Germans' policy versus Soviet Union, it also reminds me, probably, if I recall it correctly, about sort of, a next thinking in the Germany's foreign policy, which is a peace through trade. And that's something which Germany has been practicing to varying degree of success, first with Soviet Union, then with Russia, until the war in Ukraine put an end to sort of, to continuing practicing that policy.
It showed that there's a limit. There were good successes, and I think German unity was possible because there was an opening with Russia. There was an element of trust of the Russians towards us, and vice versa. But it showed that there's a limit, that Russia defines national interests in a way that's incompatible with fundamental principles that we hold dear in international relations, which is not changing borders by force, respecting territorial integrity, respecting sovereignty of every state, allowing every state to develop the way that it wishes to. And if we happen to believe that developing in a pluralistic, democratic way, by and large, is the most promising way. And Russia, just with its attack on Ukraine, sort of gave the final proof that, if necessary, it will kick all those principles with its boot.
I agree with you, Ambassador. You have pointed out quite well that nothing is a one-way street. Nothing otherwise should be two-way street. For maintaining the success of this or that policy in one way or another. So, final question, Ambassador. As I read in the statement by Georgian MFA, that during the ministers' meeting, a special emphasis was made on the interconnectedness and Georgia's role in that respect. When you mentioned the German energy security, we could widen the issue to the European energy security. But has anything been discussed? Probably it's a bit premature question in relation to possibly Germany's participation into the Black Sea electricity cable, and is that something which has been on the agenda of those discussions?
It's kind of we didn't discuss it on this visit in any particular detail to develop any particular project, but it's the foundation of everything that was discussed in the meetings and that we've been discussing in this video conference, because Georgia and the South Caucasus have a big potential, the so-called middle corridor concept, the shortest route between Europe and Central Asia and East Asia. And certainly if the northern route is not an alternative, because if Russia continues to with its illegal and aggressive and condemnable behavior, then that route falls away. So for transport, logistics, energy, and all businesses and services around it, the Southern Caucasus region is a connection between the EU, Black Sea, Southern Caucasus, Central Asia, East Asia, and many opportunities will come. The Black Sea cable is kind of very symbolic because it shows how through the Black Sea we're connected. Southern Caucasus has great potential for producing electricity from renewables. European Union wants to be climate neutral by 2050. We need green electricity. So it's, how do you say, supply and demand could be matched. Germany has not developed any national program with regard to this Black Sea cable, but the European Commission has put a headline number of, I forget exactly what, I think over 2 billion euros that they're prepared to invest into this project.
2 billion at this stage, correct.
Yeah, and so any European number, always between 20 and 25% of that are German taxpayers' money. So in that sense, we're already involved in this project. But you know, we started the conversation talking about the fact that our foreign minister is from the Green Party, and our domestic agenda is heavily dominated by climate change issues and advancing renewables, reducing emissions. So we need green electricity, and if there's a great infrastructure project that can provide us with that, and at the same time connect the European Union and Georgia and the rest of the South Caucasus, it's very welcome. And we say if Georgia can become a member of the European Union, it can be an anchor of stability and growth for the rest of the South Caucasus. And that's the vision. So that's why it's our interest that Georgia gets the candidate status and then has successful negotiations, joins the European Union, that there's no vacuum for Russia or other powers, that there is stability here, that there is stable democracy, and that there is a positive economic development. And the outlook for that is good. The outlook for that is bright. All Georgia has to do is not miss the opportunity in December. That's the immediate challenge.
Yes, I agree.
Don't mess it up.
I agree. Thank you for once again for this reminder. And frankly speaking, on my personal notes, I'm tempted, and I would not resist, that temptation to express my appreciation, how subtle your remarks and how well you emphasize Germany's role in when it comes to EU policies and your significance, for the region. So just my personal applause to your diplomatic skills. And the final question, the ambassador, well, I'm not inventing bicycle that foreign policy does not stand separately from domestic policy. It's an extension and vice versa. By the same token, when we speak about bilateral foreign relations between Germany and Georgia primarily and predominantly, it also stands on economy, on commerce and trade. From your perspective, as the ambassador of the most vocal nation in the European Union, what your expectation when it comes to the prospects of deepening our business ties and economic relations, what we should expect in the near term or in the mid-term? So please share your views in that respect.
Yeah, so their also approximation to the EU is the best way to advance business, because EU countries do the majority of their business, importing, exporting, investing with other EU countries, because there's a legal framework. In the end, there's a single market, no trade barriers, no other barriers, free movement of people, free movement of capital, free recognition of professional qualifications, and so on and so forth. So EU is the key to unlock that, really. I think there are unexplored, or how do you say, there are business opportunities here for German companies. I wish more would come. The building sector has potential, and our biggest companies are in the building sector. The whole tourism sector. A lot of German tourists are coming, and Georgia was the host country at the largest tourism fair in Berlin in March, and that was very successful. But so not just tourists, but also hotel operators, other tour operators could be here. Agriculture could be an area that could be of interest to German companies. And then also the whole energy, especially renewable sector. We do have some good know-how and experience in Germany. So those are the areas that I think more business opportunities exist and are being used. But the best way to open them is to advance closer and closer to the European Union. Then the business people will come by themselves.
I completely share was what you just said, and in addition to the EU framework of deepening our business ties, what I had in mind, tapping or unlocking Germany's potentials in terms of bringing more German investments to Georgia. And I'm always repeating that the legal aid is one thing which is very helpful, very instrumental, but what is also very important are success stories and the word of mouth. I think, that those stories would be sort of, the best ambassadors or the best conduitors for German investments operating successfully in Georgia. So I think, that's something Georgians should be mindful of, and providing with better ground for doing business in Georgia and better communication policy as well. Ambassador, wrapping up our discussions, which have been very helpful and very insightful. It's not just for the sake of sort of, making a formal consultation. Your message, your closing message to the Georgian audience as of the ambassador of Germany to Georgia, if you could sort of, your wishing list, to put this in a way.
My wishing list. Just to say one more sentence on the business side. What's very important is skills development in all sectors in Georgia. We're focused on that in our cooperation. I know many German companies have difficulty filling positions here. And my wish is that we all understand that Germany and Georgia have a deep and broad historical friendship and partnership. I think we're quite fond of each other. The Georgians tend to like the Germans, and we like the Georgians very much. And my wish is that we understand that we have a great opportunity that's right in front of our nose, and that's the decision by the European Council, the 27 heads of state and government. So the governments are going to decide this in December. There is some time until December, but it's not a lot of time. And it's a historical opportunity of which no one knows whether it will present itself in the same positive way after December. Perhaps it will, but not necessarily. We don't know. So let's grab this opportunity now while it's there, and then move forward on this path of further approximation of Georgia towards the European Union. It's a clear win for all of us.
Thank you, Ambassadors, and just to emphasize and reemphasize that with all the appreciation for German-Israel help and the support of Georgia, Germany has a clear advantage in this country because of historical legacy, because of German soft power, widespread German languages, German culture, many Georgian students studying in Germany. So there are all conditions or preconditions for successfully promoting those bilateral ties and bringing them to a qualitatively new level. So may I thank you, Ambassador Fischer, for your time, for your patience with my questions, wishing you a nice evening and wishing you a very successful diplomatic stint in Georgia, not just on behalf of Germany, but on behalf of our bilateral bonds as well. So thank you so much indeed.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure discussing with you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.